Hello everyone and welcome to another episode on Mark's English History channel, and today I'm going to be talking about an event that occurs in the early 12th century, and it's going to have a profound impact on the rest of Middle Age England, and it's called the White Ship Disaster, and it's possibly the most famous event in this period of history that a lot of people haven't heard of. So hope you enjoy. You can find my content here on YouTube. I've also got a Facebook page and also a Instagram page as well if you want to look at it, all under the same title, Mark's English History channel. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. The year's 1120 and Henry I is in Normandy with his court, which includes his sole legitimate heir, William Athlin. William is very important to Henry because he, as well as being the sole heir, it's everything he's worked towards in his entire career as King of England. He's obviously named after his illustrious grandfather, William the Conqueror, but also on his mother's line through Matilda of Scotland, he's got descent to the Anglo-Saxon kingship and the Cerdic line, dating back to the kingdom of Wessex and Alfred the Great. So as a result, what of Henry's policies, what he's been able to do in the time that he has been king is to unite the English and the Norman elements of his country that have been, I wouldn't say at war, but non-united under the earlier kingship of his father William I and also his elder brother William II or William Rufus. So that is why, as well as being the sole heir, why he is so important, because he is this living embodiment of what the country that Henry has tried to create. And so to pass the crown onto him, it will be the crowning achievement of this. So, and the court itself has been in Normandy and France since 1119. They go there, one, because obviously Henry is still Duke of Normandy, so he's going there to take ownership of that land, etc. But also because he's on a diplomatic mission as well. William is now of age that he can be married, and so he goes and arranges the marriage between William and Matilda of Anjou, daughter of Fulk V, Count of Anjou, and will be the future King of Jerusalem. The marriage between the Normandy and Anjou is a big political statement. They've been semi at war / in disagreement for quite some time, but with also what will be the amalgamation of the land of Anjou and Normandy, it will give William eventually a large power base in that region of France, potentially even bigger than the King of France himself. So it is a rather big dynastic marriage that is going to occur. After the wedding, they spend a bit more time in Normandy, securing both Henry and William's territories there. But also another part that's played is that, and it's believed that William is quite influential in this, is the signing of a peace treaty between Henry I and the French King Louis VI, also known as Louis the Fat. And that is another major part of Henry's kingship, that Normandy and France are at peace. And then the crowning achievement of this peace is that William William Athlin kneels before Louis VI and pays him homage. Now, it's quite possible at this time, we don't know for certain, but the fact that he's paying him homage may indicate that at this point Henry has made William Athlin the Duke of Normandy, because as King of England, he would not need to pay homage to the King of France, but as Duke of Normandy, which is land within France and going all the way back to the original Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, when the land is given to Rollo from the French king, the Dukes of Normandy are subservients of the King of France. So paying homage to him indicates that this is potentially the moment that William Athlin becomes Duke of Normandy, and he will the beginning of the transfer of power from Henry I to his son is beginning at Normandy, being now the smaller part of the Northern Norman Empire, if you wish to call Northern lands part of an empire. It's something that we may do a video on later date. It is passed to William as a practice run, so to speak, of power and of semi-kingship. However, but by November 1120, it's time to return to England, and so that's the basis of where we're at when it comes to what is going to happen on the 25th of November 1120 and the aftermath of this event. Today, the town of Barfleur on Normandy's Cotentin Peninsula, just to the east of Cherbourg, is a small fishing village, but in the 12th century, 11th and 12th century, it's actually a central part of the interconnectivity of the Anglo-Norman Empire, as it was. For it was here in 1066 that William the Conqueror's flagship, the Mora, which was gifted to him by his wife Matilda, is built in preparation for the invasion. However, if Barfleur today is a sleeping fishing village, then the events of the 25th of November 1120 will make it the epicenter of the earthquake that will rock this Anglo-Norman world. So the White Ship is a vessel that was built and sailed out of Barfleur, and it was a large and fast vessel for its time. The Chronicle Orderic Vitalis described it as being excellently fitted out and ready for royal service, and that is exactly what it is chosen to do, because Henry I entrusts Thomas Fitzstephen, the owner and captain of the White Ship, to carry the royal party of William Athlin after successful petition of Thomas Fitzstephen. His grandfather was also one of the captains of one of the ships in the initial invasion, so he does have a royal connection with transporting the royal family of the House of Normandy, and so he's been asked to carry the prince's party, which includes not only William Athlin but also two illegitimate sons of Henry I, Richard of Lincoln, and William's half-sister Matilda, Countess of Perche. Reason why I say Countess of Perche there is because Henry I actually has two daughters, Matildas. the other one of which we'll come on to later, but that makes it a little bit more confusing. So we'll call her the Countess of Perch, just to make things a little bit more easier, so that we don't get confused between the two daughters. And numerous other young Norman lords, either in lordship themselves or heirs to be lords. So this is the princely court, so to speak, that's on the vessel. Also included in that number is William's cousin, Henry I's nephew, and another, as a result, another grandson of William the Conqueror, Stephen of Blois. So Fitzstephen is entrusted with the most important cargoes to transport back to England, and Henry I actually, if the chroniclers are to believe, warns Fitzstephen of this, and he says, "I entrust you with my sons William and Richard, whom I love more than my own life." The weather that day, afternoon, evening time, we are looking at, basically dependent of working back from the timing of the key event. Always set for a fine and fast journey back to England. The wind is blowing from the south, and the king's ship slips out of Barfleur and into the channel in the afternoon. However, back on board the white ship, the exuberance of youth is taking over. There's a lot of drinking and merriment going on after a successful time in France, and Fitzstephen starts to boast about how great his ship is, how big, how fast it is, to the extent that he says, "I can overhaul the king. We'll be in France before your father." And then something occurs that changes it slightly, is that some priests turn up to bless the voyage, and in the drunkenness of this party, shall we say, they are sent away, with the youthful princes and lords kind of belittling the religious aspects of what they're doing, and some on board see this as a bad omen, and they send an ominous signs, and they make some excuses to leave. Chief among this being Stephen of Blois, because as events will unfold, he will take a much more prominent role in what is to come. And he stated he had an upset stomach, and that he didn't feel like travelling that night, and that he would leave the vessel and find a different ship home. Around about midnight, the white ship slips anchor and sets off for England, and this is the point that everything's going to change. William and Malmesbury, in a later chronicle, speaks of the white ship being swifter than a winged arrow, sweeping and rippling the surface of the deep. As the white ship sets off, it doesn't even make a mile out of Barfleur. At the point that where the harbour of Barfleur is, you have to pass a large rock formation known, and I hope I get the pronunciation is right, the Quilbeth. And the first sign of problems is when the town's inhabitants hear a sickening crash as the ship runs into this rocky outcrop. The impact punches a hole through the wooden hull of the ship, and starts to leak water. Now, at first, the ship itself is stuck hard on the rocks. As seawater starts to gush in and the ship starts to founder, the crew, I wouldn't say start sobering up, but they're obviously shocked into realization of what is happening, and they attempt at first to try and free the ship from the rocks. However, all that manages to do is to create an even larger hole in the in the ship, and it begins to sink faster. At this point, William's guards realise what's happening, realise their duty, and actually finally come to their senses and get him into the small lifeboat we'll call it at the moment, using modern day terms. It's a small rowing boat that would have been used to ferry people about, etc., and set off for the nearest safe form of landing, which I believe is about half a mile away from where the accident occurs. In doing so, they're leaving the rest of the crew and the passengers to their fate, but they have a duty. It's save the prince is the priority. It's the heir. He's the most important person on that boat. So the boat starts making its way to the shore when, again, according to Berhold the butcher, who will become the only survivor of the White Ship disaster, he hears the cries of his sister Matilda, the Countess of Perch, begging to be saved. Now, we don't know for certain whether or not she's in the water at this point or whether or not she is still on the boat. Now, in his book, The White Ship, Charles Spencer believes that because of the weight of her dress, that she would almost certainly still be on the boat, because if she was in the water, that dress would just pull her down. Wherever she is at the time, William orders the crew of his small rowing boat to return to save his sister, and that, being Prince, they do exactly what they are told. What then happens, though, is that as they row back into the wreck area, the wreck site, there are hundreds of people in the water at this point, and as they row into the wreck zone, shall we say, that they are swamped by desperate people in the water. It's a time period where possibly the crew, the mariners, may know how to swim. Most people don't, so they are clinging on to wreckage or anything that can float. And as this small boat comes into this area, it's swamped and it's pulled under, and so too is all the people on board, the guards and William. And that is the last time William is seen. He dies, and his body actually is never recovered. At this point, Berhold the butcher is clinging to the mast of the ship, and actually Thomas Fitzstephen is on there with him. He wasn't a witness to the drowning of the prince and the prince's boat going under. He gets to it later, but when Berhold tells him what had happened to the prince, Thomas says, "My life is not worth living. I know what the king is going to do," and slips off of the mast and also drowns in the sea. So only Berhold is left at the end of this story sequence. With the 11th century, travel between the continent and England was faster than we probably anticipate. In 1066, it only took one evening for them to cross. So it comes as a surprise when we say that news of the disaster travelled slowly to reach England. You would have expected it to have travelled far quicker than it actually did. And when news finally reached Henry's court, the courtiers were so afraid of his response that they actually left it to a young servant to deliver the news to the king. And it was said that the king's heart broke at that moment and he never smiled again. But it left Henry with a bit of a quandary, because although he had fathered 24 children during his life, only 2 of those were legitimate with Queen Matilda, and she had died 2 years previous to the disaster. So at this point, fathering another heir is fairly remote. However, the following year he does marry the teenage Adelaide of Louvain, but this marriage failed to produce another heir. So that left Henry only one option, and that was for Matilda, the legitimate Matilda, who is at this point Empress Matilda. She's been living in Germany for the last 10 years as the wife of Henry V, the King of Germany, but also the Holy Roman Emperor, which is where she gets the name Empress from, and that she'd actually worn the imperial crown on numerous occasions. She had governed in Henry's absence, but at this point Henry had died, and so she was a former, although still holding the title of Empress, she was no longer the Empress herself, because someone else had taken that title. So in 1125, the now widow Matilda is brought back from Germany to England by Henry and is being prepared for queenship. And at the Christmas court of 1126, the barons, she's on the throne next to Henry I, and the barons swear fealty to her as the legitimate heir. Again, at this point, Henry again is looking to the future, and he feels that to really secure this this succession, that she needs a strong husband, and he once again looks to Andrew. Obviously, you've got you've had that previous wedding, but that's gone with the death of William. So she is married to Geoffrey of Anjou, a late brother-in-law, and he had a custom of wearing a bright yellow broom blossom in his hat, and was nicknamed amongst the Angevins, the natives of Anjou, as Plantagenista, and that is where a name that will become synonymous with medieval England first comes from, Plantagenet. So the sons, eventually the descendants of this marriage, are going to rule England for the next 300 years or so, depending upon where in the succession line you deem that the Plantagenet dynasty kind of ends. If you look at Dan Jones's book, The Plantagenets, he says it's the point at which Henry Bolingbroke becomes Henry IV and usurps Richard II. Or alternatively, you can argue that it goes all the way through until the death of Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. So whichever is the longest dynasty of any royal family in English history will come from this marriage. However, despite all being set for Matilda to become queen after Henry's death, the barons are starting to plot behind Henry's back, and a common custom of kingship within the medieval period in England is that whenever you get a very strong, powerful king, upon their death and the succession of their heir, the barons do attempt to try and rip some of that power back. And so it's not uncommon that this will happen. But when Henry dies at the end of November 1135, one by one, the barons that swore their allegiance to Matilda begin to desert her and for another claimant, and that claimant is William Laflin's son and as a result Henry I's nephew, the other grandson of William the Conqueror, Stephen of Blois, who we last heard about leaving the White Ship stating his stomach issues. And so he is proposed as the counterclaimant, and being male, that swings the deal for most of the barons to desert Matilda and at first move over to Stephen. At the time of Henry I's death, Stephen is actually in Boulogne, where he's with his wife's family, and he immediately sets out for London, where he proclaims himself as the king. From there, he moves on to Winchester, which is the home of the Royal Treasury, and seizes that. And as a result of having the Royal Treasury, it's one of the big keystones of kingship. And then he gets himself anointed as king by the Archbishop of Canterbury and crowned. And at this point, the few remaining barons that are loyal to Matilda come over to Stephen and proclaim him as king. So at this point, Matilda and her family are out of the equation and disinherited the rightful queenship that was hers by birthright and by the succession plan put in place by Henry I. It's not as simple as that, though, in saying that that's it. It sets in motion a 20-year period of civil war and unrest in England, and it will become known as the Anarchy. And at the end of this 20-year period, Matilda herself wouldn't win, but her son Henry does, and he will become Henry II, the first Plantagenet king. He would be the father of Richard I, the Lionheart, King John, and the whole sequence from then on. And however, that's another story for another time. So thank you for listening. Hope you got some information about the White Ship, and leave any comments on the channel, and I will come back to the rise of the Plantagenets at a later date. So thank you and goodbye.